Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters. Forest elders breathe their last, I'll bring them for your supper.
Hey y'all, Kelly here. Welcome to episode 51 of the Ground Shots podcast. Yay, we got to over 50 episodes. It's so exciting. This episode of the podcast is a part of an ongoing series we've been doing here on the Ground Shots podcast on wild tending. And this episode features a conversation with Allie Meters-Knight. Allie is a Mechoopda Tribal member, mother of 5, and traditional basketweaver based in Chico, California. She is a Mechoopda Tribal liaison working to form partnerships for federal forest stewardship contracting and tribal forestry programs authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill. She has been a Traditional Ecological Knowledge, or TEK, practitioner for over 20 years, collaborating on environmental education and land restoration projects with Chico State University and the City of Chico. In 2009, she helped plan and establish Verbena Fields, a unique 17-acre interactive food forest and interpretive park in North Chico to help educate the community about the rich ecological heritage of the Mechoopda people. So a couple things here before we get into this conversation with Allie. I just wanted to thank the podcast audience and folks who follow me for buying a bunch of herbal medicines from me recently. I didn't have a whole lot that I posted, and I don't really sell things that often, but I was really excited to be able to share some salves and medicines, small batches with folks recently. So I just wanted to say thanks to y'all if you listened to the podcast as well. And everyone should have gotten all of their things by now, so let me know if you don't. And also, the podcast has a Patreon page, and you can find it at patreon.com/obsedgensalt, and it's linked in the show notes for every episode. You can also find show notes for every episode, usually with extra photos and stuff on the website, and you can find a link to our Patreon on our website as well. If you happen to be on the website, you can also find it there. So our website is obsedgensalt.com. And so Patreon is just an easy way to support projects like this, where you can choose to give an amount every month. We have a couple different tiers. You can also just do a custom tier. And in exchange, you get access to early release episodes of the podcast, extra content from people who've been on the podcast. And since I've had Patreon for quite a few years now, like ongoing 3 years, there's definitely a backlog of content on there that you can have instant access to if you want to support this podcast. So go on over there if you feel called. You can also share this podcast on your social media platform or with your friends and give us a review on iTunes. That would be super helpful. So let's go ahead and get to this conversation with Allie, and happy listening, y'all.
Logs of locust cedar splits, I offer sweat and splinters.
My name is Allie Meters-Knight. I am a Mechoopda Tribal member in occupied Mechoopda territory, also known as Chico, California. And this is 2 hours north of Sacramento. And been living here for many years. I was born in Virginia, but I started basket weaving in 1998. And from there, I learned to teach a little bit about traditional knowledge of plants around the area to kids through an outdoor education program. And today now I'm founder and creating a program called Tek Chico, which is a outdoor education program for adults to be certified to do land management on a large scale for 20-year stewardship contracts here in Butte County.
Well, for folks who don't know what TEK is, or Traditional Ecological Knowledge, I know that some people who listen to the podcast may know what that is, but can you explain a little bit like what like how you define that and what that means?
Yeah, so as I'm a tribal member of a tribal nation here in California, we have inherited knowledge of how to take care of our landscape. And interesting enough, being a basket weaver, some of that knowledge was given to me so that I could find and maintain materials to basket weave. We're looking from, Santa Barbara sedges to deergrass to willow, as well as other plants that also complement the habitat of these basket materials. So this knowledge and how these plants work, and they've been passed down not only through basket weavers and tradition, but through other medicine people and other I'd say like people that have roles in the tribe. But since colonization, a lot of that has changed. However, that knowledge seems to stay alive in our basket knowledge. So from there, I would say that traditional ecological knowledge is the traditional way I've been able to maintain an ecosystem based on traditional knowledge from my tribe. And these practices, and even what I would even go further and say basketry is a technology that extends to the ecosystem.
Awesome. And my next question was, why is TEK or traditional ecological knowledge vital for social and ecological health? I know that it's like maybe obvious for you and me, but for folks who are listening who are trying to understand why it's important, maybe you can expand upon that.
So healthy forests really do a benefit to our community, and we can get away from kind of the spiritual holistic view that's been spelled out to us through a lot of media. However, what we haven't been able to pull ourselves away from is understanding our relationship with our ecosystems and how that plays into our local economy. And so when we have been kind of brainwashed to believe that only forests produce habitat for wildlife, A, and B, lumber, and C, camping grounds, then this limited scope of products that you can get out of a forest and they no longer complement what we would call cap and trade. So what happens is traditional ecological knowledge is a way to reintroduce ourselves into the territory that we live in with a new eye on economic development through the products that we see through our forests. And we can learn what those are through traditional ecological knowledge. And this place-based knowledge of what plants can do and the products that we can get from them are far more enlightening than we believe. We have to almost separate ourselves from the belief that traditional knowledge is primitive, when in fact it's advanced. And the way that we view and treat forests today is primitive. And so it's dispelling that social inadequate viewpoint that we've all been, and even myself, were raised to believe, and redoing it and saying traditional ecological knowledge applied to our ecosystem and forest benefits our communities, our economy, and our social dynamic and infrastructure.
Totally. Yeah, the dynamic of land is just a means to an end, and also as a place to recreate or as some kind of pristine wilderness are all problematic kind of concepts that the bigger colonizing social culture kind of perpetuates now too, that is obviously causing harm in so many ways and needing to be unwoven and undone and fixed, to be honest. And I feel like the work you're doing and more people learning about TEK is really a way to remind people that this is not okay. These ways of seeing the land is not okay. So
I really would like to expand also people's perception of when they go through the forest, that they're in California, your federal forests encompass most all of what you see. So everything you see as far as a forest is owned by the federal government and not by the state of California. And it is not under control of the state of California, and is not under control of your local municipals. And when you have a United States forestry that's in charge of delegating contracts for forest management, it used to be that lumber companies would be taking up on the offer because it was a appetizing benefit based on the economy. And this is in the 1920s, 30s, early times. And so these contracts now we're 80, 90 years past all of this prime market. And now there's no bang for the buck when it comes to logging in California. And so with the United States being pulled out of the UN, peace, not peace, but climate, with the United States pulled out of the UN's climate negotiations and agreements, there is even less reason to manage the forests correctly, especially there's no money in it. So that's why the USDA now has all the money for forest management, and people have to follow the money, and it's now sitting in a different reserve, a federal reserve of money. So what people used to get contracts from the US forestry, now they're going to be going through the United States, the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, because you have to look at the products that are coming out of the forest in a whole different way. So either we're going to do it or we don't. Either the corporations are going to do it or we're going to do it locally. The only way we can do that locally is if it's tribally led for goods for services through partnerships. So it's really important that local communities understand the dynamics of partnership and an indigenous-led economy on local products pulled from the forest, where it doesn't get exported as the main cap and trade goal of it. And there are many competing forces that want that, but the ultimate goal is to satisfy the federal requirement that sovereign nations only negotiate goods and services with the federal government, and corporations and states are excluded from those negotiations. And that is federal law. So to adhere to that law, we can use the federal agreement with tribes to do land management on federal land in our forests for goods for services. And that's a big mouthful, but that's how it is.
Can you expand a little bit on the what the Tek Chico program is and what your intention is behind it as it's related to what we're speaking about now? And yeah, just expand a little bit on that. It seems like there's not much like that out there, like a certification program in this way, and it seems really awesome.
Yeah, so the TEK certification program came up in complementary to complement the sovereignty of my tribe, and to allow the knowledge of traditional ecological knowledge, or the knowledge that comes from TEK, to not be exploited by corporations or state agencies. What's important is for TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, to empower community members and create a workforce. So the ideal was, in order to get large projects, large contracts, 20-year stewardship contracts that are coming through the USDA now for land management, because the forestry was doing 5-year, 3-year, 7-year contracts, and they weren't doing much. By the time 3 and 4, 5 years would change, and it would be back to needing maintenance. So 20-year contracts need large workforce. So in order to get a workforce started, we had to start with certification and pretty much an education institution. And that becomes part of goods for services in its nature right off bat. So what happens is people can, when you have, the state of California has mechanic's license, you have to have a license to drive, you have to license to cut hair, you have to have these types of license, but there is one that the tribe can do, and that is certification for land management through TEK. And this workforce development is possible if we do this, to build capacity to fill these 20-year stewardship contracts on federal land. And we have 180,000 acres of federal forest alone in Butte County. So in order to tackle all that acreage, we're going to have to create pretty much a workforce. And so to certify a workforce is a nature unionizing people. So this is a very different approach to land management that a lot of communities don't have, but it's to create a workforce, certify them, unionize them, and allow them to pick up contracts, 20-year stewardship contracts, long-term contracts on the management of our forests.
It seems like it's sort of a bridge between the traditional way that TEK was done and like the need in a world where everything is so contracted and organized in this sort of formalized way, a bridge between those worlds, and also employing indigenous peoples in the places where they live to do the work that needs to be done in those places, that versus corporations from far away coming in and just sort of using the same thing that they did somewhere else, that it's like completely out of context. It seems like that is an important bridge to be making.
It is, because the capitalistic approach that we have had to maintaining our forests as a country, United States of America, is very primitive. And it was developed in a time when this nation didn't have the science or even the racial equality that it kind of has today. And so for me to be a Native woman, being able to explain to foresters today, and to be on the radio, to be on podcasts, to be publicly acknowledged as an expert, to say traditional ecological knowledge is far more healthy for your economy than the disaster capitalistic approach that corporations have made toward land maintenance. So they would rather everyone kind of go through the shock and awe of a natural disaster and be left with nothing, while as the tribal approach of TEK is to build resilience for when there is a time of natural disaster. We can have adaptive measures to survive, and this survival of our DNA is innate. And if we resist this innate desire to survive, I think that's when we all do get depressed, and I think that's when we do lose our sense of self. And so this is where we also weave into the social justice that happens when you start taking care of the land around you.
So the past couple years, maybe it's increased in the past decade especially, but extreme fires have been a huge thing in California, and even though fire is supposed to be on the landscape, a lot of these fires have been extremely large and devastating. And people, I know I'm from Virginia, I'm from the East Coast, and out there, even though fire is also actually a part of the ecosystem, it's definitely not we don't have as many fires, it's not as talked about. And I hear people say things like, well, why do they let these fires happen, and why do they not manage their land right, and things like that. And just people who live in a place where where fire is not as talked about, I guess. And I feel like in California and in the West Coast in general, people are just familiar that fire is a reality. I think more people are becoming they're starting to understand that like fire controlled burns and fire is needed on the landscape. And so I guess I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the necessity of fire in California, and also why the suppression of fire is the reason why we have these devastating fires.
Yeah, I'd love to expand on that. Ironically, I'm from Virginia. I was born in Fairfax, but I grew up all around Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, Stafford, all that area. And my grandfather, who often burnt leaves in the ditch every fall, every couple of weeks, and there would be the scorched earth, dark ditch around the house, and then a few weeks later, it'd be this beautiful grass. And that was my first memory of doing fire, was actually on the East Coast in Virginia with my grandfather, burning leaves that fell out of the yard and putting them in a ditch. And I think it was to that time in the 80s, that fire and fire permits seemed to be a lot less invasive to the community. People were not so disturbed to see a neighbor burning leaves in their ditch in their yard. And then to come back to California, where I've been, I was born over there, but I'm bi-coastal. My family's at Carter's from over there, and I'm a Mechoopda Tribal member from California as well. So I come to California and I have dealing with basketry and realizing that all the basket material that I have are fire adapted, and they're actually in need of fire in order for the seeds to work, and for the health of the soil and for the health of the plant. And every part of what I'm doing is needing fire. And so that any type of fire let off in California, if I was to burn even the smallest fire in my yard, you would have the fire trucks over here. Ironically, it's a very anti-fire place here, California. It is hyper vigilant about any types of flames that it can be seen. And it's not because of negligence. It's almost because of overzealous cautiousness that we have not had good management of our land with fire. Whereas I think it's just the mentality. California wildfires have triggered trauma in so many residents and people that they will not allow an ounce of fire management around them. Prescribed burns scare them, especially traditional burning with tribal members, because a lot of Californians, if not United States citizens, believe that Native Americans are dead and gone. And so their view of some primitive caveman-like people that survived genocide that they don't even believe may not even be there, pretending to be Indians, burning their landscape, is typically the viewpoint of the common California person, even though people believe that they're very left and very open-minded and very wise about natives and the life of the hippie of California. Northern California is very misrepresented. This place is in Northern California has an abundance of ignorant, racist people. And a lot of what's important about focusing on California and its health, it's its relationship to the United States. We are in California, especially in Northern California, we are your number one economy in the United States. We make the world go round for the whole United States. The United States is on the tit, literally, of Northern California. And that is why it's important to focus on the health of where your money and milk come from. And so when Northern California's soil is not healthy because it's have invasive plants, it's been burned down to scorched earth, and there is no living organism able to survive the heat of those fires. And when you have water that is contaminated with all kinds of materials because of not only wildfires burning materials in communities like in Paradise, California that are toxic, but you're also going to have flooding and mudslides. The integrity of the landscape of the watershed is completely compromised. And so these aquifers that are your filtrations to drain the water, they're all being pumped, and the water in California is free. Your bottled water, all Nestle has to do is go ahead and just put a straw into the water here and just suck it out and sell it everywhere. And it is unregulated. California allows these corporations, and that's why it's important. So when people are very passive and they're just not included, they don't think it matters, then one day, whether it be from fault of spirit leaving body or just experience here on earth knowing the truth, you'll see that we are very interconnected, and what happens here matters a lot more than you think.
Breathing tide rolls in and out. and breathing tide rolls in, and I receive all the ripples of love of the earth and the sea. Is there ever sound? Let it go, let it be. All the ripples of love as the earth and the sea. We praise and breathe, let it go, let it cycling. Mother moon as you give and you take. We praise and breathe, the circling, cycling. I receive all the ripples of love of the earth and the sea. And zero sound, let it go, let it be. Mother moon as you give and you take. We praise and breathe, let it go, let it cycle. All the ripples of love as you give and you take. As it resolves out, let it go, let it be. Mother moon as you give and you take. We praise and breathe, the circling, cycling. As zero sound, let it go, let it be. And breathing as you give and you take. We praise and breathe, the cycling. All the ripples of love of the earth and the sea. As it rolls out, let it go, let it be. Mother moon as you give and you take. We praise and breathe, the circling, cycling, rippling rhythms of all that live.
Do you feel like that the Tek Chico program that you're helping facilitate could be a model for other things like that, like across so-called California, or also, regionally in the West in general?
Well, definitely all tribal programs should be able to be worked out in any tribal nation across the United States. So tribal law affects every tribal nation, and using the USDA Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, that allows 67 provisions for tribes to have goods for services agreements and partnerships with local people for local economy. It isn't a model definitely that can be used anywhere and everywhere there is a tribe, in which there are. Tribal nations are what are the sovereign, I don't want to say domestic dependence, but because it's not fair, but it's true. Domestic dependence, we are nations within the boundaries of the United States. And by rank, we have more, we should be by rank above the states themselves. So that would mean that the state of California would be little brother to a sovereign tribal nation. And so that would give local residents an opportunity to work with federal entity on federal land, which in this case in Butte County is 180,000 acres of federal forestry, which they had never had access to without a USDA, or I'm sorry, a forestry grant that only lumber companies had access to.
How can people find out more about the program that you're helping facilitate, Tek Chico certification programs? And what is the process like for people who go through that?
Yeah, so it's tekchico.org is a website. That is the first website we have. We have another one that's up and coming. It should be coming in a few months. And the tekchico.org program is just a sounding board of programs that we have, some outreach that we're gaining. But the program that we've designed is meant to kind of look like a college campus, and the materials they're kind of based out in phases, where you can go through the first, say, 18 months worth of or a year's worth of programming to get a basic TEK education. So say the phase 1, part 1 would be 25 native plants that are keystone species, and you'll learn the native name for those keystone species in that area, that place-based placed on the tribal language. For instance, if we're talking a keystone species here is mugwort or wormwood, and we call it Munmuni. So we would teach you Munmuni, and Munmuni has all these properties, and Munmuni has a whole, knowledge based on itself and where it goes and where it's ecologically placed, what plants benefit from its presence, and how to maintain it. And we go through 25 keystone species of indigenous plants, and then we go through another phase of 25 invasive plants. And now those can also be native. Invasive does not necessarily mean not native, but invasive plants just means they have a behavior to them that you need to understand and recognize. And in here, we would have an invasive plant that's non-native, like Scotch broom, that has different looks and feels to it, but you would understand how to recognize it, how to remove it, how it behaves, and what it does to the soil. So you go through that regimen. And then you would be able, after you've done all that, you would be able to go into a specialty. And this would be kind of like how college go, you get your basic degrees and then you want to get your specialty degrees. So we've kind of put it out into three spaces, where there would be one where it's plant medicine, where you'd be learning how to process products from the forest into medicinal uses or plants, or product like acorn flour from acorns, and how to process and how to recognize and do that process. Or then we go into fire management. We can also go into specialty, where you just want to be into traditional fire. So you're going to be learning all the fire regimens of all the area, and you're going to be specializing in the fire regimens. And then the other one would also be environmental planning, which is after you've gone through all that, then you can get into your GIS mapping, planning, and kind of more technical part of the bigger landscape designs that we're doing. So that's typically how the TEK program is designed by theory. And we are excited that we've kind of launched it. We're starting forward. It is designed, and we are just getting funding for it. And once we get the funding to go forward, we would be able to implement this as soon as possible.
I was seeing on your website that you've been working with the City of Chico, I believe, right? Doing some of this stuff already. And does it seem like they're pretty receptive to integrating TEK in land management and within the city and around the city? It seems like possibly they are. I'm curious how that's been going.
I mean, I started this campaign in 2007 and 8. So we're now 2020. So for me to say they are receptive now is generous of me. But I will say it, though, to be generous, that they are receptive. But I have paid my dues, and I've worked on different projects in the city. One was Verbena Fields, was a project we were introduced to. I was introduced to do a native garden, and this basically asked if I wanted to, do a little garden of native plants. But knowing TEK and how I am, that was hilarious, because I just couldn't imagine just like putting native plants in a row and watering them. Like, I don't know, it was just funny to me. Anyway, I asked them if I could have the whole park, and explained to them the importance of having a whole park of native plants, and how they were trying to restore this watershed. And the only way to restore this watershed was to do it with native plants as well. And so the argument was easily won with support of Chico State faculty and Professor Don Hankins, who helped assist me with that. And so now it's 2020. We've had that. It's been 12 years, and the baby plants, the trees that we've planted are over our heads. They're teenagers now. They're not big guys, but we have a big relationship with Chico State now, with the cave office. And every Friday I'm out there with students, and they get credit and they get a lot of knowledge and get to work with me on land management for about 3 hours a day.
Cool. Well, I know it's a slow process sometimes working with, towns and cities and like sort of these official organizations, because they have their own ideas about what they think things should look like and how things should function, which sometimes just make totally no sense whatsoever. I was talking.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, for years, honestly, and this would surprise a lot of people, and then not surprise a lot of people, but in in 1900, Annie Bidwell handed over this big lot of land that John Bidwell had to the city and said, this is a city park, and I'd like it to be kept exactly the way you received it, in honor of God. And so it's 2020, and I finally have been able to get them to stop doing that in meetings, referring to Annie Bidwell as a policy of land management reference that is now, without her having any knowledge at all, of land management, she should not be a point of reference of how to do things. So I've been able to convince folks to keep her name out of their mouth when they talk to me about ecology locally. And so far, so good.
This person had the romantic idea that they wanted whatever it looked like to stay exactly. Yeah, there's so many problems with that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking
Yeah.
to someone who was doing native plantings in Vancouver, BC for the podcast, and most of them were culturally significant plants for that area, and the city actually really didn't want her to put fireweed in, which is a really important plant in that area, because they didn't consider it pretty, or like, I don't know, they didn't like it. And she's like, well, this is an important plant, it didn't grow neatly in rows easily, and it liked to spread itself. And she's like, this is just what it, you want me to put this here, but you know you have to kind of accept that this is part of what this is, and it took them years, but they eventually were like, okay, fine. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Chico's, our Bidwell Park here is really big. It's one of the largest parks in the United States, and ironically, the invasive plant population has increased without this land management. So the whole point of keeping it the way it was impossible without the indigenous land management practices, without the fire. Now it is a different landscape because of their methodology. And so, a lot of local folks here that do, city planning and really want to have plants, they based on aesthetics, have really put the community at a disadvantage, for the upcoming, for the future, because we should be looking at our public spaces as food forests and places of free food, and things that we can survive and live with, without being dependent on an extractive economy that is very fragile, and so I really hope that the practice of indigenous management also incorporates the idea of making food more accessible in public spaces. And so it's not always about native plants. There are some food plants that are not native that can be put into these landscapes to serve that purpose. And I understand, locally we have walnut trees that people are like, these are historical, great walnut trees. And I'm like, says who? But at the same time, their purpose is more as canopy than it is for food if people are not eating those walnuts. And if nobody's eating the acorns of the oak tree, it's the same thing. So without this goods for services, and without us looking at these things as products, we're not coming full cycle. We're not living the full, the cycle, the circle of life here. We're missing some loops out of our circle of life, and it's important that we experience those. And so I'm a proponent of all native plants, but I also think that it's important to have food sovereignty in all of our communities.
Y'all had some pretty big fires the past couple years. It was the Paradise, the one that destroyed the town of Paradise was the Camp Fire, is that correct?
That's
And there
correct.
was one this summer that was also pretty large as well, right?
The Bear Fire, yeah.
Has there been any efforts from the county to integrate TEK into like dealing with the immensity like after those fires, or is that still something yet to come?
It's still something yet to come. We have county representatives who just did their first rodeo with FEMA and Cal Recycle and Cal EOS on emergency services and how to manage a crisis. And so, not to find fault completely, it's a really difficult maze, and it's hard to make everybody happy when when your goal is to be sure that you get reelected. And you know what's important for these local folks to understand about TEK is that when they're doing these contracts for land management with corporations that are not locally based, they're not going to get, it's not going to benefit anybody here, or within their their voting base. So it's going to come out over time. So if you want to have a program locally that doesn't go away, that absorbs and only builds capacity with workforce, then you should go with TEK in your community and through your tribal through tribal nations. And in this place with tek.org, it's more of a partnership. So we're trying to be a lot allied with nearly every tribe that it's around us in California, and even outside of California, that's interested in working with us, so that we could build capacity uh, for local folks to expand their knowledge, not only on this place, but in places that other tribal nations that we have contacts with. So this is about building almost a new type of university, where traditional ecological knowledge is um, the base of how you create a workforce, and a new, almost like a new approach to dealing with climate change, and how we mitigate surviving that, and or how we mitigate those changes, and how we survive what we get afterward, which is sometimes devastating flooding, sometimes building from scratch. And if we don't have the right seeds, if we don't have the right knowledge around us, we can really be taken advantage of and put into places that we really cannot thrive in.
Was there anything else you'd like to share with listeners here at the end of the conversation?
Well, yeah, I'd like to tell listeners that um, we're coming into a different era. And I'm 46 years old, and I'm a mother of 5. And my friend told me this, and I think it really needs to sit with everybody, that we've all been kind of waiting for something to happen that give us a chance, to give us some hope that we can do something different and change the way that we live, and have a future that's hopeful also, and a place that we can thrive and be creative. But that a person to be able to do that couldn't be privileged. A person that could dream that up had to have a complete set of hardships that no other could see. And to be an Indigenous single mom with a child who's disabled, and having all the obstacles that I've had in my life, um, I believe that this hard work comes from a very humble and earnest place, and it belongs in everybody's life. And I'm honored to be able to speak to everybody and offer this idea, and it's there to take. It's free, and there's nothing to gain from it. There's nothing to lose from it. It's everything to gain.
Well, thanks for sharing your ideas and passions and this project with the podcast listeners. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It's really fascinating to see what you're doing, and I really hope that it expands and grows, and that this model continues and it becomes like the normal thing.
I do too. I really hope that this is just the beginning of something that becomes so common to us that we forgot the time when we didn't know it.
Let's go on home for the California hillside runs gold. I said hello to enough people, so let's roll right down the hillside on home. My grandmother, she said to me, wherever you roam, to come back to the hillside under the shade. My mother, she said to me that your veins run with the roots of California trees. You know, it's been too long since we looked up from the hillside below. Your friend who came before you are waiting on the hillside for your embrace. Remember the years before you were born, how lovely your face it was to dream. Your skin we wove in the company of the Milky Way, and the stars were blessed by the California stream. And the stars were blessed by the California stream. And the stars were blessed by the California stream.
Hey y'all, you just finished a conversation with Allie Meters Knight, and the music for this episode, 2 songs. The first one was by Samara Jade. The song was called Building a Bridge. That's what you heard in the center of the interview. And the second song by Stowe Lake, which is a band local to the same region where Allie lives. The song was called California Hillside. And you can find the Bandcamp for both of those bands linked in the show notes. And you can buy their music and listen to more that way. Also, I have some links in the show notes for Tek Chico and the farm bill that Allie mentions, as well as ways to support the podcast. So thanks for listening, y'all, and look forward to next time. Take care. This episode of the Groundshots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.